Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. This week's episode of the show is absolutely vital listening for financial advisors. Andrew Crowell, the Vice Chairman of Wealth Management at D.A. Davidson, is back with me, and we're going to be talking about financial fraud and how to identify when your clients might have been a victim of fraud, as well as what you can do to help them avoid becoming a victim in the first place. And frankly, of equal importance, we're going to be discussing some of the things you and your team can do to protect your firm from becoming the vector of financial fraud, which you definitely don't want to do. Andrew and his team recently conducted a study which frankly discovered some eye-popping numbers when it comes to financial fraud. So I promise you, this is an incredibly important episode for you, your clients, and your firm. Okay, before we get rolling, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a guest or a topic for the show, hit me up. I'm basically at Mike Langford everywhere on the internet, or you can just shoot us an email, podcast@finservmarketing.com. All right, let's get to the conversation with Andrew Crowell. Well, Andrew Crowell, so wonderful to see you, buddy. Welcome back to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast.
Thank you for having me, Mike. Great to see you.
It's great to see you too. And I am a little bit envious, and I might have to take you up on an invite. You're like, hey, come on out to Pasadena for the Rose Bowl. If you so
Open invitation, my friend.
I know, exactly. I have never been to Pasadena, and I love it. So I'm a huge fan of Southern California, and I keep trying to twist my wife's arm a little bit, like, come on, man, it's so nice. Be near the beach. It'd be all great. So I have a feeling at some point in time, we will be hanging out your way versus here, because it's really hot here, man. Well, listen, I'm thrilled to have you on the show again. As I was mentioning before we click record, you are one of my favorite guests. We have now done several podcasts together. But today's episode is one that can sound a little scary, the topic. We're going to be talking a lot about financial fraud, but we're coming at it from an angle of wanting to help financial advisors and their clients avoid financial fraud. So what really brought this topic up is, according to a recent study that you and your team at D.A. Davidson conducted, 22% of Americans report that they have personally been the victim of financial fraud, and nearly 1 in 4 have had a loved one who's been a victim of financial fraud. So, even if those overlap a little bit, we're getting close to half of Americans have experienced it. So, and those stats, they're pretty alarming, right? So when your team sent over the study, I was like, yeah, I really want to have a show about this to offer financial advisors, some guidance on helping their clients avoid becoming victims of financial fraud and or helping them recover from fraud if it happens to them. So I guess before we dive in to some of the recommendations, and we are going to have a bunch today for advisors, could you offer some color on like what types of fraud are you seeing folks fall victim to, like most frequently? Like when we think of fraud, like what are we talking about here?
So the most common that I think we all see are email phishing attempts. These are emails that arrive unexpectedly, usually with a hyperlink or some request to take immediate action. It could be a password reset. It could be an account verification where you click the radio button on it, and then it's asking you to provide your account number or your password. And these phishing attempts, with computer hackers having access to graphics and, stealing logos off of legitimate company websites and the like, it's really easy to get duped. So that's far and away the most common one we see here at our firm and across our clients. The second one would be legitimately hacked email addresses that are then sending to the advisor and or the advisor's firm a wire request for funds. So it looks like it came from Mike Langford. It appears to be Mike Langford's actual email address, but you're asking me to direct funds unexpectedly to another account that isn't the one we have on file for you, for example. And so we as a firm and as advisors have safeguards in place to double check and verify and authenticate those requests. I think, thinking about phishing emails, far and away the most common are these password reset ones.
Yeah.
almost everybody seems to have a Netflix account these days. If you receive an email like that, go to the app on your television or on your phone and click log in that way and see if in fact
Yeah.
there is a password expired on your account. But
Yeah.
don't click on a link from an email you weren't expecting. It's just not. Go directly to the firm's website. You type it in yourself. Don't be duped by a hyperlink. I'd say another one that we're hearing more and more, and it's really alarming to me, are fraudulent calls. They could be
Mm.
persons presenting themselves as grandchildren who are in they're stuck at the border, they're stuck at an airport, they might be in jail. My late mother got a call supposedly from my nephew who said he was in a Mexican prison and she just needed to wire $10,000 so that he would be released. And fortunately, she had seen her grandson the day before, knew he wasn't in Mexico. But playing on somebody's heartstrings. Of course, they
Yeah.
want to help their grandchildren, and of course, it sounds urgent and dire, and you know uh, these false senses of urgency to get you to act before you think. This is a common tactic employed by fraudsters.
Yeah. I tell you, you hit on some of the ones that, are really hard. You'd be surprised. Like, so, um, there's a solution out there called Know Before or something like that,
Yes,
that a lot of companies subscribe to, and it actually sends out test fake emails, seeing if they could dupe you,
yes.
just to show you how easy it is to get tricked. And you'd be surprised at how, to your point, how authentic. And we've probably all seen them. Like, I actually got one. We were just talking before we clicked record that I just got back from Las Vegas. We were at NBA Summer League, and right before we went, and I got an email from the airline that I was going to fly on saying, "Hey, your frequent flyer miles are going to expire if you don't, buy some, the trip soon or something like that." I'm like, "What are you talking about? I've flown on you several times. I've actually just literally the day before booked another flight using this airline." I'm like, "Oh, clearly, uh, you guys are some. This is not a legit." And to your point, I went directly to the website and go to just to look,
Or
like, let me look at my account for frequent flyer miles here. I don't see anything weird, but
I'll give
this is
Mike. I'm sorry to
good.
interrupt you. I'll give you two more that just occurred to me. I'm not sure why I forgot to reference them. The first is maybe an unexpected call at your home or on your cell phone saying that your
Mm.
laptop or your computer has had a password breach.
Oh
I
yeah,
My wife had a call on our home phone number from McAfee, supposedly saying that
yeah.
her laptop was beaconing, and all she had to do
Hmm.
was give her password and an access code to the person on the other end of the phone, and they could take the malware off of her laptop.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You know, so I walked in the door and I said, "So let me get this right. You got a call from somebody you don't know that you weren't expecting who's asking for your password. Any of this sending up red flags?" Um,
Yeah,
IRS agents, supposed
yeah,
IRS agents, saying that somebody's filed
yeah.
a tax return in your name and they're just calling to verify if you can give them your social security number, they can double check if it's the same one as the fraudulent return that was filed. These kinds of things. They don't make sense, but they are important and they sound urgent and they get people to share information that they wouldn't otherwise share because they just are feeling nervous.
Well, it sounds so. I mean, I'm kind of like smiling along and a little bit laughing at the preposterousness of like these attempts. But to your point, there's a lot of times they come with urgency, right? So you're like, "Oh, I got this. Must be something I have to do right now." They're coming to your phone. Like, how would they have gotten my phone number? Of course, that type of thing. And then we're gonna be talking a little bit more about this a little later on the show, talking about seniors. But this sounds silly, but there's a population of people, seniors, are a large body of this population, but they're often lonely, right? They're at home, so so they welcome any type of call or interaction, but also they're not sophisticated in their grasp of digital communication, right? Like, because these things are new. I mean, my mother-in-law, as an example, used to call my wife, going, "Well, Amazon called me to ask me about my order." Like, no, Amazon's not going to call you about your order, and to you and me who are familiar with all, Amazon, we know this, of course, but like, when you're 80 and Amazon to you is this relatively new thing, you're like, well, why wouldn't the company that I just bought something from might call me about my order or whatever, right?
That's right.
So yeah, we're gonna dive into a lot of this. I think one area where I want to shift gears a little bit is just to set the stage a little more emphatically for the advisors listening to this. Like, look, this is not just your clients that this happens to. Frankly, this is not just like low sophistication, small dollar type of stuff. There have been reports of chief financial officers of Fortune 500 companies wiring $50 million overseas because they thought they were talking to the CEO who said, "Yeah, we're going to do this deal. Like, go ahead and let this fly." Um, I was meeting with a startup company here in Austin who is trying to fight fraud. They're coming up with a solution to fight fraud, and their target market is actually working with venture capitalists because a lot of VCs, they've seen some fraud with, they get a deal, term sheets signed, all that type of stuff, and they go to wire money to their startup and whoops, they sent it to the wrong place because somebody got in there and attacked and like outgo seven figures worth of value. And so like they can't let that type of stuff happen. So this is not something that only happens to mom and dad and
That's
aunt
right.
and uncle type stuff, right? This is really good stuff. So
That's right. And Mike, the advisor is in a unique position because it may be your mother-in-law's first call from Amazon and wondering if
yeah,
that's legit, but likely the advisor and the advisor's firm and the advisor's clientele, they've seen one of almost everything at this point, one way or
yeah,
other. If you've been in the business long enough and you have enough clients, you're in a unique position to act as an educator, advisor,
yeah,
a wingman for your clients to prevent them from falling into those traps. And so it's a great opportunity for our industry to say, hey,
yeah.
look, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. And if your
That's
hard-earned
that's
savings
right.
could go out to a foreign bank account tomorrow and you have nothing left, all
Yeah.
that work we did for all those years gone. So
Well,
we're a
yeah.
team.
I think of like I'm glad you brought that up. Like this is a very valuable conversation that you can have with your clients, not just for them, but for their loved ones too. Like to educate them on a, this is rampant. Like there are a lot, and with there's a lot of new AI tools coming about. There's video and voice spoofing tools coming out. Uh, you have to be extra diligent. And so and we're going to be talking about some very specific steps that an advisor can take with their client, specifically as it relates to the assets in house. But like little things like we've already kind of talked about, but they're worth hammering home. Like tell your clients that like most of these things aren't urgent. Like as an example, I always joke about our industry. Like there's almost no financial advisor emergency, right? There's very few times where you're going to get a call as a financial advisor that this has to happen today and within the next hour, right?
Right.
I'm sure most advisors can count on one hand the number of times that's actually happened in their business. Most of the time, it's like, hey, we're thinking about buying a house. We're thinking about doing this type of thing. We're going to want to move money. They're planned, right?
Right. Right.
It's not like, Andrew, please, I need this cash right flipping now. I'm
Right.
stuck in Mexico.
Exactly. Exactly.
Type of deal. But yeah, helping your clients prepare for this stuff. Like, hey, put some process in place for like, okay, in the event that somebody reaches out to you for this type of stuff, what do we do next, and so forth. But before we get there, let's kind of back up a little bit and talk about noticing fraud attempts because it might sound a little strange to many of the advisors listening to or watching us, but people really don't feel confident in their ability to notice fraud attempts. You usually think that people kind of, when you ask these surveys, people usually project more confidence or project more strength in their life. Like, oh yeah, I could notice fraud. I would, because nobody likes to admit weakness, I guess is what I'm saying. But in your study, you found that 33% of respondents said they feel very confident in their ability to spot fraud attempts, which is to me a really low number. So what do you think is behind the lack of confidence that people feel in their ability to spot fraud attempts?
We had the same reaction, Mike. The sort of self-effacing humility that came through in
Mm,
the percentages. If 1 out of 5, almost 1 out of 4, have been a victim themselves, and if almost the same percentage have a friend or loved one that's been a victim. I think there's an acknowledgement, whether we want to wave our arms around it or not, that technology and the advances and the pace with which technology is moving forward maybe is moving ahead of a lot of our abilities to feel really confident that we understand what's going on and what the process is and whether or not this is legitimate. Back to your earlier example, would a department store in days gone by call to verify an order? Sure. Yeah, it was a person-to-person exchange, and you came in, the suit you ordered last week is ready for pickup. That makes sense. You and I also know that that's not the way Amazon is structured. It's all electronic, and there's status update. You can track your shipment on the app and so on and so forth. And I think it's so prevalent, and almost a quarter of the population's been a victim themselves or knows somebody who's been a victim. That just caused people to say, gosh, maybe I shouldn't be as overconfident in this regard as I am. I know I lock my doors at night. I know I lock my car. I've got a low jack on the car, but gosh, all these other accounts that I have, I read on the paper or hear on the news of data breaches every single day. And if they can data breach a Fortune 100 company, maybe I shouldn't be as overconfident as I previously would have been.
Yeah, it is true. It's we've all clicked the wrong thing. I mean, I think that's we all could. As much as we hate to admit it, we've all clicked the like, oh darn it, that was BS. And then hopefully you didn't do the second click, right? Which was like entering information, personally identifiable information or whatever, as you mentioned, like the Netflix reset your password, or hey, your payment declined. You're like, no, it didn't. That type of, like, okay. But we all have been like really close, if not have gotten tricked on something and had to go fix it. So don't be overconfident. But what we do want to do here is give you some, a little empowering you, right? Because I don't make you overly confident, because that's when that's where con men, the confidence scheme comes in. But let's talk a little bit about noticing when fraud happens, because it is likely going to happen in some level, definitely for some of an advisor's clients. It is going to happen in that pool of people who are entrusting you with their financial future. It may not happen through you, but it's going to happen to some of them. So, one thing that really jumped out to me in the study was that only 24% of respondents said that they felt confident that they would notice that a loved one has been a victim of a financial fraud. And I think this is kind of a pretty obvious thing, right? Most people don't like to talk about money matters with friends and family, number one. And then, there's also this feeling of a great shame that happens when you've been victimized. Like, you feel like an idiot. You clicked on the wrong thing. You said yes on a phone call. The next thing you know, you're like, oh, shoot, they stole my money. But I guess I have a two-level question here. Number one is, what can an advisor do to educate their clients on the signs that a loved one may have been the victim of financial fraud? But I think a secondary question there is, and I didn't think about this when I was thinking about the prep, but what can an advisor do to make a safe space for the client to admit that they've been victim of financial fraud and seek their help, right? Because again, that I don't know, man, like, people hate that. Like, nobody likes to feel like I was such an idiot, I got tricked, oh my gosh. So let's talk a little bit about that.
It's an important conversation, and I hope that advisors, take the opportunity to create that safe space. Most of us live in a neighborhood where a neighborhood watch program is in effect. And I'll look out for you, you look out for me. If you see something, say something. Let's help each other. None of us are there 24/7. Your Ring doorbell maybe doesn't get my front door, but maybe it gets your neighbors, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
If we're in communication about, we don't have to share every detail, but let's not be afraid to be open about this. We know it's prevalent. We know it's on the rise, and the advisor can speak from their, as I said, their own repository of experience to say, gosh, our firm has seen 10 fraudulent attempts like that in the last month. Let me tell you about it. Let's talk about it. We'll tell you what safeguards we put in place to prevent that from happening at another time here. Or, And so I think creating that open dialogue, kind of along the lines of a neighborhood watch, nobody's going to disagree with saying it makes sense for us to look out for each other. I'm not here
Right.
24/7, and I haven't seen everything that you may have seen.
Right.
And if collectively we pool our experiences, maybe we can all prevent fraud for each other. So that'd be number one. I think sharing specific details about uh, clients' behavior. Advisors can note a change in client behavior. Suddenly, there is that urgent wire request. They said,
Yeah.
Mike, hold on a second. Wait, we just had a review a month ago, and you didn't mention this expected distribution of funds. Tell me what's going on. And an advisor can gently but firmly ask those probing questions to say, Mike, this doesn't sound like the way we normally have done things before.
Yeah.
Is everything okay? Often, what we have seen, and it's heartbreaking, but we've seen a form of elder abuse with
Yeah.
older clients where they are lonely and perhaps they meet a new friend, a companion, somebody they go to the movies with or on a trip with. And suddenly the advisor might suspect, why is this person now the TOD beneficiary on the account? They've only known each
Yeah.
other, what, a couple of months? And and now Mrs. Jones is wanting to invest in a opportunity in Mexico using payphones.
Yeah.
This so having trusted contacts listed on accounts so that the advisor could reach out to somebody else if they suspect that the client may have been a victim of fraud or may be unduly influenced by a third party, or just the advisor themselves using their antenna saying, gosh, this is a change in pattern here.
Yeah.
That's a red flag. That's an alert for me.
I love that you mentioned that if you see something that seems off, right, to you, the best thing you can do is have that conversation. And you might be uncomfortable with this, right? Like, so I know that if oftentimes when you're talking to your client, as much as you believe they love them and you love them back, there's always a little bit of apprehension of shaking the tree, if you will, too hard, and then having that client get a little annoyed, like, oh, Andrew, I don't expect you to ask me why I want my money. It's my money, that type
Right,
of thing. We get a little nervous, but it's like, no, that's what you hired me for, right? Is
right,
to help you achieve your financial goals. And I know something that's a little off, and it almost feels like you should have that upfront discussion, like before the emergency happens. You should say, listen, we're looking to be good stewards of you and your family's financial well-being. If we ever notice something off, we're going to ask you about it, because it could be something, to your point. Elder abuse is rampant. People taking it, taking advantage of grandma, or the neighbor taking advantage of the old lady who just happens to live by herself now, or it could be something like, no, and this isn't fraud. This is down another lane. But what if somebody's developed a little bit of an addiction problem, and all of a
right.
sudden we're starting to see money moving weirdly,
Yep,
new behaviors, right?
yep.
Somebody's going to Vegas too much.
Right, right,
You know what I mean?
right.
So being
Or Mike,
aware.
the advisor suspects perhaps the early signs of cognitive decline,
Oh
and
yeah, good one.
just the can I trust the decisions we're going to be making going forward? I always have, but I'm starting to hear some forgetfulness. And uh, boy, Mr. Jones called back, questioning again that wire we did last month, and he was
Yeah,
the one who called it in, and he was the one who verified it, and now he doesn't remember it. So these are all important conversations for advisors to
yeah,
open that door to in advance, to just say, look,
yeah,
I'm hopefully it's going to be a multi-generational relationship, and the advisor can be that bridge to future
yeah,
generations of sharing that institutional knowledge about how that wealth was created and what
yeah.
important values behind it, and the importance of preserving that.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the uh, noticing cognitive decline, because that opens somebody up to being an easy mark, right? Because if they're starting to have trouble processing time, remembering things, and so forth, if you notice it, chances are somebody else in their life is noticing it. And that, not everybody has good intentions. But as we know, like, some of this is just inbound randoms too, whether it's email, phone calls. So if somebody's getting confused with easy stuff, like, we recently had in our family to deal with a family member who's experiencing cognitive decline, and it can be unnerving. But the early signs are like telling the same story over and over again, not remembering that you just talked about this yesterday or the day before. Like as soon as you notice, like we literally had a conversation that it was a
Right.
vibrant conversation, and you're talking to me as if that didn't happen. Yeah, might want to red flag. If somebody who's come to your office a bunch of times is suddenly lost, like, hey, how do I get to your office again? Like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We might want, and so great point. I love the fact that you brought that up because again, a lot of this is elders, but it's not limited to. But they're sometimes the most vulnerable to it. So, speaking of that, you and your team published a guide for fraudulent prevention for senior investors that highlights several common scams. And I wonder if we might share a few. And I think you touched on a couple at the early part of the podcast. So we just want to help the audience get an appreciation for the risks that their clients are facing out there, that some of these things are happening. So obviously fraud is not exclusive to the seniors, as we mentioned, but
Right.
many of the folks are pretty at risk. So I wonder if we can cover a couple. You mentioned like the grandchildren one, but there's bound to be a few others that we should be on the lookout for as
Well,
well.
the romance one is an important one as well. Suddenly, there's a they are lonely. They've met a companion. They're traveling together or going to movies together, and uh, again, preying on somebody's emotions. They may not have the best of
Yeah.
intentions. They may be fantastic, and they may be exactly
Yeah.
the next partner that individual needs. But then again, just having one's antenna up to make sure, gosh, that moved quickly, and now all of a sudden they're rewriting their or amending their trust to include this
Yeah.
individual. Say, wow, that's quick. I have a client. In fact, this just has been happening over the last several weeks, and she's in her mid 80s. She's never had an email account ever. So we do
Yeah.
everything the old fashioned way, either phone in person or snail mail or FedEx.
Yeah.
And suddenly there was a nephew that is going to help her get her affairs in order. Well, that all sounded smart, sounded like a trusted contact. And yet, our team has been careful and on guard to just make
Yeah.
sure that the document revisions aren't reflecting changes in the original intent, because we know the client is still cognitively well. She's just not
Yeah.
technologically savvy, and so she
Right.
is using this individual to help her facilitate paperwork changes and getting her affairs in order. But that, again, is just one where we're keeping close eye just to make sure everything is legit. Another common one with this just happened to a client about 2 months ago. The bank called him and said his account had been tampered with. There was
Hmm.
fraudulent wire attempts out of his account. So they needed to open a new account for him at the same
Oh
bank
no.
and transfer the property in. Did he hang up the phone and say, I'll come down to the branch right now? No. He, fearful that his life savings was going to evaporate, he quickly gave his account number, social security number,
Oh
and
no.
before he knew it, the funds were gone. And now he's working with the bank fraud department to try to
Yeah.
reclaim his rightful property. But he gave away all that information because it was his life savings, and the bank called and it had an urgency to it, and it all sounded legit. And I told him, I said, I wish you had called me first. And I would have said, let's call the bank together, or let's go to the
Yeah.
bank branch together and we'll investigate that.
Right.
So that kind of recovery scam is commonplace. And then the false tax return. We know that the IRS does not call our homes,
Right.
and elderly or shut-ins that are home all the time, to get that call and suspect that somebody has stolen your social security number or filed a fraudulent tax return in your name and is trying to get a refund in somebody else's name, what have you. These are unfortunately just common scams we see to the
Yeah.
senior population.
Yeah. It's we talked about it with the Amazon thing, but you know it's really important, especially for somebody who may not, as you mentioned, be on email or may not have a cell phone or be using a smartphone, to let those people know, like, hey, or even if they do have those things, like, your bank is not going to call it or email you or text you and ask you for your social security number. They are not going to ask you for your account number. Those things they will not do digitally, right? If there's a problem with your account, they will ask you to log in, go to bankofamerica.com, right? Or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
Or just, if you
Right.
have the number of the bank, call the bank directly. Don't accept their inbound call. Call your financial, to your point. I mean, it's funny, we don't think of it this way, but you are, as a financial advisor, you are an agent of your client, right? An agency has power. You have the ability contractually to act on behalf of your client. Most of the time it's centered solely on marketable securities. You have the discretionary authority to go in and trade on behalf of your client. But it's okay for you to mentally feel like, hey, I have a greater responsibility here to act as a, vested agent for my client's behalf. And so if they, again, start, you should talk to them about these things ahead of time. So
Yes.
let's dive into that kind of fraud proofing your practice type of stuff here, because while your study focused on the financial consumer primarily, and those recommendations we had there for elder scam lookout type of stuff, this is a big risk for financial firms as well, right? That fraud can happen at the firm. I mentioned earlier that you could be a victim as a financial advisor. You could click the send button and like, oh crap, now you're on the hook for this. But this could really disrupt your business, right? And I thought this was kind of a funny thing that just got to work in there. There's a famous bank robber called Willie Sutton. And when asked by a reporter, why do you rob banks? He just said, because that's where the money is. And believe it or not, there's a Willie Sutton rule in investing that comes from that notorious thing. It's called the Willie Sutton rule. It's like, look for the low hanging fruit, the easy mark, the easy whatever. Guess what, financial advisors? You're where the money is. So let's dive in a little bit here. Like, what processes can or should advisors put in place to protect their clients and, by extension, protect their firm from financial fraud?
Great question. Well, first and foremost, the firm itself probably has policies and procedures that
Yeah.
the advisor should avail themselves of quickly to understand what is the proper procedure for a Fed wire request, and what are the cutoff times required, and are there signatures required, this sort of thing. If I receive an email request to send funds out to a different bank than the one we have on record, what's the process for amending or processing that? Often firms are using not just two-factor authentication on their client portal websites for logging into accounts, but they're also doing verbal verification, sometimes two-way, where we need to make an outbound call to you, Mike, to the phone number of record we have for you on file, and verify the wire request, the dollar amount, the delivery instructions of where we're sending it. So I think for advisors to be upfront and share with their client, we have protections in place, but you need to know that fraud is real. And so we're constantly updating and amending our policies and procedures. And if it sounds cumbersome or like we're standing in the way of you being able to transact business quickly, please understand this is all for your protection. We've put these safeguards in place because we don't want to call you up and say, oops, that account number you gave us wasn't the appropriate escrow account for you to close your home purchase. It went somewhere else, and these things could happen. So, the two-factor authentication, it's a new commonplace thing. We all, during the pandemic, couldn't be in person and sign documents together. So new tools like DocuSign became available, and tell you people who aren't confident with their computer abilities, or maybe don't even, use the computer much, that it looks really suspicious and scary. And I'm filling out forms online. Is it really safe? And so advisors are in a position to educate their clients about what legitimate tools they and their firm and their team use to verify things. Mike Langford, if I receive an email from you to send money out, I'm never going to send the money out without getting a verbal verification from you, because emails are too easy to hack. And I want to make sure that came from you, that you're aware of it, that I could ask you maybe what's it regarding? Was this for that home repair that you told me was coming up? And then that way the advisor and the client are in a partnership, and they both know that each other is looking out for the other's best interest.
It's so funny that you mentioned. I'm so glad you mentioned that, the whole like double verification. Like, if I get an email, I'm going to call you. If you call me, I might email you, or I might send you a text to yourself, whatever it is. Like I need to hear this twice from you, or twice, like once from the husband, once from the wife, or whatever, like trusted partner in there. Because I tell you what, this is really appropriate for the younger generations. And I would say, like, my age on down, the Gen Xers on down, even, like, who are very, very savvy with technology, but also very impatient because technology has made life so quick and instant gratification. Hey, I'm going to put the brakes on you, client, in cases where major events are happening here, where you're asking me to change the bank account that's connected to your financial accounts, where we allows us to, like, there's going to be a tap the brakes on that. It's going to take a little while because we want to make sure it's safe. If you call me up saying move money for whatever reason, it's not going to be flip a switch and the money's going to be instantly moved, like you may see with a Venmo request or something like that. This is way too important. So just so you know, we're going to have some pieces of place. I absolutely love that mindset, because again, we're so like instant gratification wired now.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And I think that you mentioned texting or instant messages on our phones. Boy, the whole purpose of that, if I can respond to your paragraph question with a thumbs up emoji, it's instant reply, right? And the behavior change here that we're trying to inject in the middle is think before you act. And if it sounds too good to be true, trust your instinct and verify. It may be too good to be true, but don't just click on the link. Yeah, you're going to regret it.
This is a funny one. Just, I thought of this because we use Dropbox for certain things, and Dropbox has a solution called a vault, right? So it's a security vault that has not only has to have two-factor authentication on it, but it also has, if you lose your password or whatever, can't answer, like, it's got these other code words that are on a list that you can download and put someplace, where in the event that you can't get in, you grab this. It's kind of, it thinks of that the nuclear launch codes, right? Like, two people have to do it, and you have to open this thing, and you have to be able to read the code. Like, okay, I'm opening the envelope. The envelope has this code on it. Can you read the code back to me, or whatever? And then you both now financial advisors could do something like that. Now, it doesn't have to be like we both have the same code words, but you could have your own version of security questions with a client.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
You could know things about the client, like, Andrew, like, over the course of your relationship, you could write down things like favorite color, what position did you play in sports in high school, all these types of things. You could have some things where you could actually question the person. If you're afraid of voice spoofing or email or whatever, you could, because your client, right?
Exactly.
You could be a little more
exactly
protective.
And if they haven't had that conversation, they shouldn't be afraid to still verify. For example, I just say, hey Mike, where again was it that we first met?
Yeah.
Boy, if you hear a long pause, hey Mike, what kind of work do you do again?
Yeah.
I'm a contractor. You know that. Okay. Yeah. Fortunately, different application, but I mentioned my late mother, received a supposed phone call from her grandson in a Mexican jail. She was smart enough to think of that in her own way, and she said, Christopher, what's the nickname you call me?
Interesting.
Long pause. Grammy. Okay, she's never been Grammy, never was Grammy. She was Nana, but she was never Grammy. And that was just, all the warning flares went up at that time. And I was really impressed that she thought to do that, but it didn't sound like her grandson's voice. And okay, if he's in distress and he's in a jail, but having that, probing question, even if it wasn't a code word per se, it was sufficient to say, this is not legit. I'm going to hang up now.
Yeah. I love that you bring that, because listen, it's not to reduce clients to like like children, right? Like you're the dad and they're the kids or whatever, but you have to be protective like that.
Right.
And then be willing to, I would rather have you be mad at me, Andrew, after that I asked you some, what you think were silly questions, or I took a little longer to move the money, than have you be really mad at me. Because guess what? It's kind of like us. I mentioned, we're huge basketball fans here. And one of the funny things about the NBA is like, it's a lot easier to fire the coach because you can't fire the players, right? And even when the players make really bad mistakes and like, no, we didn't lose this game, or this season didn't stink because of the coach. It actually stunk because that guy was not doing his job well and was acting like a jerk on the court. I think the same is true with your client relationships, right? Like, not only could the person have fraud that might not be unrecoverable, but if something goes wrong, even if they initiated it with you, if it happened in an account that you're kind of overseeing, their discomfort and shame or whatever may just cause them to go, I'm firing you. Not that, you know what? I know it, even though they know in their head it wasn't your fault. It's like, no, Andrew, I'm going to move someplace else. I can't bear to look at you anymore.
Right.
So protect your firm. All right. So we're kind of kicking for home here, but we've given advisors a lot of stuff to digest in terms of like how to identify fraud, how to make sure that we kind of have those conversations with clients, and then and what things to be on the lookout for. But let's just assume it's too late. Fraud's happened. So we're at that break glass moment. Oh shoot, client has experienced fraud. What are kind of the immediate steps that the advisor should take and or recommend to their clients to stop the bleeding and begin the recovery process?
Great question. First and foremost, notify the financial institutions with whom that client's in contact. If they suspect their bank account has been breached somehow, obviously they need to contact their bank. We should always be checking our monthly statements or online transactions vigilantly, but even more so once you think that your account's been hacked into. And so notify the institution, who will probably put a freeze or open a new account or start their own internal fraud investigation to protect you. But don't be quiet about it. Don't be ashamed of it. Send up the warning flares and let the organizations that you work with know. We get clients whose bank accounts get tampered, and I'm proud of them. Their first call after that, calling the bank, is to call us to say, can you put a notation on my account that my bank account's been tampered with? They're going to open a new account. Those wire instructions that you have on standing on file for me, those are no longer going to be valid. I'm going to have a new account number at the bank, and I'll notify you of that. So first thing, notify the institution. Second of all, change passwords, and do that by going directly to the website, the application, however the legitimate access point is for that account. Change the passwords. If your email's been breached, change your password or open up a new email account with a fresh password and use a strong password.
Right.
Not password one as your password. Use a strong one. Realize too that there's information we give out on our social media platforms and our websites that not just location information on where we might be, but also the names of our pets, the names of our children.
That's right.
And don't give fraudsters any more information than you should. I think that there's often I encourage clients annually to check their free credit report from each of the 3 large credit rating agencies. This is critical. You may have a revolving credit line listed there, opened in your name, that you didn't even know about. And if you don't know about it, call the institution and close it. But sometimes just through the mail applications or online applications, people can open these things up. So if you've been a victim or just as a preventative measure, look at your credit report and make sure you understand the balances and the vendors listed on there. And if you don't recognize them, call the vendor and find out about it.
Yeah.
The last thing I would say is it's more of a warning in advance. If it's already happened, don't store your credit card information online if you can help it. In other words, if you order from Nordstrom's frequently, you can click that continue as guest rather than opening up another online account with another online merchant and storing your credit card information there as well. Think about all the points of breach that you open up by storing your credit card on multiple vendors' platforms. You're always going to have one or two. That's understandable. Maybe it's Amazon, for example, that we've referenced. But gosh, be really judicious with how often you're giving out a credit card number. Because again, if you've already been breached once and that information's out there, they could keep using it until you turn it off. And so it's a team effort, and the advisor creating that safe, open conversation place to just say, look, Mike, just trust me, we see so much. I want to be there to help protect you. And so if it sounds like things are taking too long, please know, hey, expeditious service is what I want to do, but I not at the expense of your asset safety. It's just too critical that we get it right and protect you.
I love it. I love it. I love all the suggestions you just made there. And, one that particularly jumped out to me is if you see a breach in your email, that's a form of fraud, right? If somebody has hacked your email and has gained access to your email account, spoofing and hacking are two different things, by the way. So if you're listening to this or watching this, Google spoofing, Google hacking. They're not, usually when you see somebody on Facebook going, my account was hacked. No, their account was spoofed. Somebody created a fake account. That's imposter. That's an imposter account. Hacking your account means somebody's actually gained access to your account. So they now have guessed your password. They're in your email. They've guessed your password. They're using your social media. But to your point, man, oh man, once they've breached that, well, I can go to the bank and go reset password and have that sent to your Gmail account, your Yahoo account, whatever it is. And now I have the reset password. Now I can log in and now I can start doing stuff, right? So if you ever have a breach of any account, change all your passwords, especially those financial ones, right? And just it's so important that, man, when somebody's in the door, they can be really in the door fast. So, and by the way, password protect your Wi-Fi.
If your house got robbed, wouldn't you want to go change all your door locks? Just
that's right.
Wondering if that hide key somehow got taken. And the same applies here. It's an electronic key that change it.
100%. Absolutely love this. Well, I tell you what, Andrew, I'm incredibly grateful to you and to the team at DA Davidson for, the kind of generosity of spirit that you seem to have, you personally and at the firm, because that's kind of how we first met, right? You were talking about educating younger folks on financial stuff and giving back to the community. And I think this is a form of giving back to clients, their extended family, and to the advisory community here. Like, this is so important now that advisors know about this, that advisors are taking the measures to have these conversations with their clients. And I would probably say, open the door and say, hey, client, invite your extended family in for this Zoom or the webinar we're doing here on this topic, because it's really important. And I know it might, not be the most exciting Friday night for you, but it could save you a lot of money.
Save it for Monday night. Except during football season.
Exactly right. Not Monday Night Football. Exactly. Well, I'm sure people are going to want to follow up. Andrew, what's the best way for people to follow up with you and make sure they keep the fire hose of all this goodness coming in their streams?
Boy, have them reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Twitter.
Yep.
I'm active there. Our firm is active, DA Davidson. We are publishing white papers and best practices as we come across them. As you said, we really do view it as our fiduciary duty to educate the public and our clients about the rise of this. And if like the neighborhood watch, if I knew in your zip code on your block that there was a rash of burglary attempts and I didn't wave my hand or knock on your door to tell you I'm worried. I know it's summer and it's hot, but don't leave your windows open at night when you go to sleep. Don't leave the door open. Yeah. It's the same conversation. And so they can find me on the socials or our company website.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, Andrew. We'll make sure we get that all linked up in the show notes.
Great.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mike. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you very much for listening to and/or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. I hope this podcast, I know this episode is a little bit of a downer when you start talking about fraud and how rife the world is with fraudsters, if you will. But I will tell you, getting knowledgeable about this type of stuff, knowing the risks are out there, knowing the things that you can do to kind of firewall your firm and help your clients firewall their finances from the fraudsters is really important stuff. And then I guess in the worst case scenario, what do you do when fraud's happened and how do you help your clients recover? Because, unfortunately, it's likely going to happen to someone in your client Rolodex there. So I hope you got a lot out of the show. Okay, as always, please do make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform and do us a favor. Be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. See ya. Bye.